The morning sun beat down hard on Jake Sullivan's weathered face as he stood in the middle of his dying cattle ranch. Dust swirled around his worn boots and the smell of dried earth filled his nose. He looked across the brown grass that used to be green pastures. His cattle stood thin and weak near the empty water trough. Some had already died from the terrible drought that had lasted 3 long months. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead with his dirty sleeve. His hands were rough and cracked from years of hard work. At 35 years old, he felt much older. The lines around his blue eyes told stories of worry and sleepless nights. His brown hair was getting gray at the sides and his shoulders bent forward from carrying too many problems. 2 years ago, his wife Sarah had died from fever. She was the light of his life, and when she left him, the ranch felt empty and cold. Sarah used to help him with everything. She cooked meals that made the house smell wonderful. She kept the books and counted money. She talked to him in the evenings when work was done. Now Jake ate cold beans from cans and went to bed in silence. The bank letter in his pocket felt heavy like a stone. Mr. Johnson from the bank had written that Jake must pay $500 by the end of the month or lose the ranch. $500 might as well be $5,000. Jake had maybe $30 to his name and no way to get more. He walked to the old barn where his horse Star waited. Star was a good brown horse, but getting old like everything else on the ranch. Jake climbed up slowly and rode toward town. Maybe someone at the weekly market would buy his few remaining cattle. Maybe someone would offer him work. Maybe something would happen to save his home. The town of Cedar Falls was small but busy on market day. People came from farms all around to sell vegetables and buy supplies. Jake tied Star to a post and walked between the market stalls. Women sold fresh bread and men traded farm tools. Children ran between the tables laughing and playing games. Jake stopped at Tom Miller's stall where Tom was selling beef from his successful ranch. Tom's cattle were fat and healthy, unlike Jake's thin animals. "Morning, Tom," Jake said quietly. "Jake Sullivan." Tom replied with a nod. "Heard things are tough out at your place." "They are," Jake admitted. "You know anyone looking to buy cattle cheap?" Tom shook his head. "Sorry, Jake, everyone's struggling with this drought. Nobody has extra money for cattle right now." Jake felt his heart sink lower. He walked away from Tom's stall and moved through the crowd. People whispered when they saw him. Everyone knew about his troubles. In small towns like Cedar Falls, everyone knew everything about their neighbors. Then Jake heard Samuel Wright's loud voice calling for attention. Samuel ran the auction part of the market where people sold bigger items. Jake moved closer to see what was happening. A small crowd had gathered around Samuel, who stood on a wooden box. Next to him stood a man Jake recognized as Pete Coleman from a farm 20 miles away. Pete looked terrible. His clothes were dirty and torn. His face was thin from not eating enough. But what caught Jake's attention was the young woman standing beside Pete. She was maybe 19 years old with long brown hair that caught the sunlight. Her dress was old but clean and her hands were folded in front of her. She kept her green eyes looking down at the ground. Even from a distance, Jake could see she was scared. "Now, folks," Samuel called out in his business voice. "Pete Coleman here has some debts to pay and he's offering his daughter Emma for a work contract. She's a good worker, can cook and clean and help with farm work. Looking for someone to take her contract for 2 years. Jake felt sick to his stomach. He knew times were hard, but selling your own daughter felt wrong. He looked at Pete Coleman, who would not meet anyone's eyes. The man's face showed shame but also desperation. "She'll work hard," Pete said in a quiet voice. "Emma's a good girl. Never gives trouble. Can do any work you need." Emma Rose Coleman finally looked up and Jake saw her face clearly. She was pretty, but that was not what held his attention. Her green eyes showed fear, but also something else. Anger. Pride. A strength that refused to break even in this terrible moment. Those eyes reminded Jake of something. Someone. Sarah. Emma's eyes had the same fire that Sarah's used to have when she was angry or determined. Sarah had looked at Jake the same way the first time they met when he was trying to break a wild horse and she told him he was doing it wrong. "Starting bid is $50, Samuel announced. A few men in the crowd raised their hands. Jake recognized them as farmers who needed cheap help. Some looked at Emma in ways that made Jake feel uncomfortable. These were not good men looking for honest help. The bidding went slowly. Most people did not have much money to spend. Jake watched Emma's face as the men bid for her like she was a piece of farm equipment. Her jaw was set tight and her hands were now closed into fists at her sides. $75, called out Bill Harrison, who owned a big farm north of town. Jake knew Harrison's reputation. He was cruel to his workers, and his wife had left him years ago. Emma's eyes met Jake's across the small crowd. In that moment, Jake saw his own pain reflected back at him. She was alone and desperate, just like he was. She was about to lose everything, just like he was. But unlike him, she had no choice at all in what happened next. Without thinking, Jake raised his hand. $100, he called out. The crowd turned to look at him in surprise. Samuel Wright smiled because higher bids meant more money for him. Pete Coleman looked relieved. Bill Harrison looked angry but did not bid higher. Going once, going twice, Samuel said, looking around the crowd. Sold to Jake Sullivan for $100. Jake walked forward, feeling like he was in a dream. He pulled out all the money he had in the world and gave it to Samuel. Pete Coleman took the money and hurried away without saying goodbye to his daughter. Jake found himself standing face to face with Emma Rose Coleman, who was now bound to work for him for 2 years. I'm Jake Sullivan, he said quietly. Emma Coleman, she replied. Her voice was soft but steady. Thank you for not letting Harrison buy me, Jake nodded. He had spent his last money on impulse and had no idea what to do next. All he knew was that he could not let this brave young woman fall into the hands of cruel men. Now they were both in trouble together. But as they walked away from the market with Emma following behind him, Jake felt something he had not felt in 2 years. He did not feel completely alone anymore. Jake walked slowly toward his horse star with Emma following 3 steps behind him. The afternoon sun was getting lower in the sky and long shadows stretched across the dusty main street of Cedar Falls. People at the market were packing up their goods and heading home. Some stared at Jake and Emma as they passed. Others whispered to each other behind their hands. Emma carried a small cloth bag that held everything she owned in the world. Inside were 2 old dresses, a pair of worn shoes, her mother's silver locket, and a small Bible with her name written inside the cover. She walked with her head up even though her heart was beating fast with fear and uncertainty. Jake stopped beside Star and turned to look at Emma. Up close he could see that her green dress had been mended many times. Her brown boots were old but clean. She had tried to make herself look presentable even on this terrible day. Her brown hair was braided neatly and her face was washed clean. Are you hungry? Jake asked awkwardly. He was not used to talking to young women, especially one whose life he had just bought. A little, Emma answered honestly. She had not eaten since early morning when her father gave her a piece of dry bread. There's a place to eat across the street, Jake said, pointing to Murphy's diner. We should talk about your work and where you'll stay. Emma nodded and followed Jake across the street. Murphy's diner was a small building with red checkered curtains in the windows. The smell of fried chicken and fresh bread came through the open door. Jake held the door open for Emma and they went inside. The diner was half full with people from the market. When Jake and Emma walked in together, the talking stopped. Every person in the diner turned to look at them. Jake felt his face get hot with embarrassment. Emma kept her chin up, but her cheeks turned pink. Old Murphy himself came over to their table. He was a big man with a gray beard and kind eyes. Afternoon, Jake, Murphy said. What can I get for you folks today? 2 plates of whatever you're serving, Jake said. And coffee. Murphy nodded and walked away, but Jake could see him looking back at their table with curiosity. Soon the whispers started around the diner. That's Pete Coleman's girl, said Mrs. Henderson to her friend. Heard Jake bought her contract at the market. Mighty strange for a single man to take in a young girl like that, replied Mrs. Watson. People will talk. Already are talking, whispered someone else. Emma heard every word. Her face stayed calm, but Jake could see her hands shaking slightly as she folded them on the table. He realized that bringing her to a public place had been a mistake. Murphy brought their food and coffee. The chicken was hot and the bread was soft with butter. Emma ate slowly like a lady, even though Jake could tell she was very hungry. She had good manners, which meant someone had taught her well. Tell me about your family, Jake said, trying to make conversation. Emma finished chewing before she answered. My father, Pete, owns a small farm 20 miles south. We lost most of our crops in the drought. My mother died 2 years ago from fever. My little brother Tommy is only 12, but he helps with the farming. My father owes money to the bank and to several people in town. Jake nodded, understanding her family's troubles. I'm sorry about your mother. Thank you, Emma said quietly. She was a good woman. She taught me to cook and sew and keep house. She said a woman should be able to take care of herself and others. My wife Sarah would have liked your mother, Jake said. She believed the same things. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Around them, the whispers continued. Jake heard his name and Emma's name mentioned several times. He heard words like scandal and improper and shame. Emma set down her fork and looked directly at Jake. "Mr. Sullivan, what exactly do you expect from me?" Jake was surprised by her direct question. Most young women would not speak so boldly to a man they had just met. "I need help with the ranch," Jake said. "Cooking, cleaning, mending. Maybe help with the animals if you're willing. You'll have your own room in the house and fair treatment. After 2 years, you'll be free to go where you want." "And where will you sleep?" Emma asked. "In my room like always," Jake said, confused. Emma looked around the diner at all the people watching them. She leaned forward and spoke quietly. "Mr. Sullivan, do you understand what people are thinking right now? They see a single man taking a young unmarried woman into his home. They think you bought me for reasons that have nothing to do with ranch work." Jake felt his face turn red as he realized what Emma meant. He had been so focused on helping her and getting help for his ranch that he had not thought about how it would look to other people. "That's not what I intended," Jake said quickly. "I just wanted to help you and get honest help for my ranch." "I believe you," Emma said. "But nobody else will. By tomorrow morning, everyone in 3 counties will know that Jake Sullivan bought Pete Coleman's daughter and took her home. They'll make up stories about what we're doing. Neither of us will be able to show our faces in town again." Jake stared at Emma, realizing she was right. In his rush to save her from Bill Harrison, he had created a different kind of problem for both of them. "What do you think we should do?" Jake asked. Emma was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady and determined. "There's only one way to make this proper," she said. "We need to get married." Jake nearly choked on his coffee. "Married. Not a real marriage," Emma said quickly. "Just a legal one. To protect both our reputations. We can live like brother and sister. You get the help you need for your ranch. I get safety and a roof over my head. After your ranch is successful again, we can decide what to do next." Jake stared at this remarkable young woman who was solving their problem with such clear thinking. She was right, of course. Marriage would make everything proper and respectable. "Would you really do that?" Jake asked. "Marry a stranger to save both our reputations?" "You saved me from Bill Harrison," Emma said. "That makes you better than a stranger, and I need protection just as much as you need help." Jake thought about his empty ranch and his loneliness. He thought about Emma's courage and intelligence. It was not the marriage he had dreamed of, but it was practical and honest. "If we do this, it has to be your choice," Jake said. "Not because you have no other options, but because you want to." Emma smiled for the first time since he had met her. It was a small smile, but it lit up her whole face. "I choose to marry you, Jake Sullivan," she said. "Should we go find the preacher before the sun goes down?" Jake stood up and left money on the table for their meal. As they walked toward the door together, Emma took his arm like a proper wife would. The whispers in the diner stopped as people realized what they were seeing. Outside the diner, Jake and Emma walked toward the little white church at the end of Main Street. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky orange and pink. In a few minutes, Emma Rose Coleman would become Emma Rose Sullivan. Neither of them knew if they were making the smartest decision of their lives or the biggest mistake. But they were making it together. The morning after their wedding, Emma woke up in the small guest room of Jake's farmhouse. Sunlight came through the thin curtains and fell across the wooden floor. She lay still for a moment, listening to the sounds of the ranch. Somewhere outside, a rooster crowed and cattle moved around in the yard. Emma sat up and looked around her new room. It was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a wooden dresser, and a chair by the window. Jake had given her the room that used to be for visitors when his wife Sarah was alive. On the dresser sat a pitcher and bowl for washing and a small mirror with a crack down one side. She could hear Jake moving around in the kitchen downstairs. The smell of coffee drifted up through the floorboards. Emma dressed quickly in her blue work dress and braided her hair. Then she went downstairs to start her first day as Jake's wife. Jake was standing by the stove trying to fry eggs in a pan. The eggs were burning on one side and still raw on the other. Coffee boiled over on the back of the stove, filling the kitchen with smoke. Jake looked embarrassed when he saw Emma watching him. "Good morning, Mrs. Sullivan," he said formally. "I was trying to make breakfast." "Good morning, Mr. Sullivan," Emma replied just as formally. "Perhaps I can help with that." Emma moved to the stove and saved what she could of the eggs. She made fresh coffee and found some bread to toast. While she worked, Jake sat at the kitchen table and watched her move around his kitchen like she belonged there. "You're a good cook," Jake said when they sat down to eat. "My mother taught me," Emma said. She said cooking was one way to show people you cared about them. They ate their simple breakfast without talking much. Both of them were still getting used to sharing meals with another person. After breakfast, Jake stood up and put on his hat. "I need to check on the cattle and fix some fence posts," he said. "You don't have to come with me. There's mending to do and the house could use cleaning." "I'll come with you," Emma said. "I want to learn about the ranch." Jake looked surprised but pleased. "It's hot work and dusty. You'll ruin your dress," Emma smiled. "I have work clothes. Give me 5 minutes." When Emma came back downstairs, she wore an old brown dress and sturdy boots. She had tied her hair back with a piece of string and put on a wide hat to protect her face from the sun. Jake thought she looked more like a ranch hand than a lady, but he liked seeing her ready to work. They walked together to the pasture where Jake's cattle grazed on the brown grass. Emma counted only 12 animals, and she could see their ribs showing through their skin. The water trough was nearly empty and the fence posts leaned at odd angles. "How many cattle did you used to have?" Emma asked. 40, Jake said sadly. "Lost most of them to the drought. These 12 are all that's left." Emma nodded and rolled up her sleeves. "Show me what needs doing." For the next 4 hours, Jake and Emma worked together under the hot sun. Emma held fence posts steady, while Jake hammered them into the ground. She carried water buckets from the well to fill the trough. When Jake cut his hand on a piece of sharp wire, Emma tore a strip from her petticoat to bandage the wound. "You should be more careful," she said as she wrapped his hand. Her touch was gentle, but her voice was firm. "This ranch needs you healthy." Jake looked down at Emma's hands, caring for his injury. They were small hands, but strong from years of hard work. He felt something warm in his chest that he had not felt since Sarah died. By midday, they were both tired and dusty. They sat in the shade of an old oak tree to rest and drink water from the well. Emma looked out over the struggling ranch with thoughtful eyes. "The cattle need better grass," she said, "and more water. What about that field over there?" She pointed to a section of land that sat empty. "That's good land," Jake said, "but I can't afford to buy seed or hire help to work it." Emma was quiet for a moment, thinking. "What if we started small, planted just one corner with vegetables to sell at the market, used that money to buy grass seed for a small pasture, built up slowly instead of trying to do everything at once?" Jake stared at Emma with new respect. Sarah had been smart about the ranch too, but Emma was thinking like a business person. "That might work," he said. "Do you know about growing vegetables?" "My father taught me before he started drinking too much," Emma said. "I know about corn and beans and squash, things that grow well in dry weather." That evening, Emma cooked supper while Jake did evening chores. She made stew from the vegetables in his small garden and baked fresh bread. When Jake came in from feeding the animals, the kitchen smelled wonderful and looked warm and welcoming. "This is the best meal I've had in 2 years," Jake said as they ate. "It's nice to cook for someone who appreciates it," Emma said. "My father stopped noticing food after my mother died." After supper, Jake sat in his chair by the fireplace reading an old newspaper. Emma sat in the other chair mending one of his work shirts. The needle moved quickly through the fabric as she repaired a torn sleeve. "You don't have to mend my clothes," Jake said. "That wasn't part of our agreement." "I know," Emma said without looking up from her sewing. "But it needs doing and I have time." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell outside. This was how married couples spent their evenings, Emma thought. Working together during the day and resting together when work was done. It felt more natural than she had expected. Over the following weeks, Jake and Emma fell into a routine. Emma woke early to make breakfast and pack lunch for their workday. Jake taught her about cattle and horses while she shared her knowledge of gardening and household management. In the evenings, they planned improvements for the ranch and shared stories about their lives before they met. Emma learned that Jake had wanted to be a teacher before he inherited the ranch from his father. Jake discovered that Emma could read and write better than most men in town. She had dreamed of opening a school for children whose families could not afford to send them to the city. Slowly, they began to trust each other. Jake showed Emma the books where he kept track of ranch expenses. Emma shared her ideas for making money from things they could grow and sell. When Jake had nightmares about losing the ranch, Emma would make him warm milk and sit with him until he felt better. When Emma felt sad about leaving her family, Jake would take her for rides on Star to show her the beautiful parts of his land. The people in town began to accept their marriage as real. Emma joined the women's group at church and helped with community dinners. Jake and Emma were invited to barn raisings and harvest festivals. Neighbors stopped whispering and started treating them like any other married couple. One evening in late summer, Emma was washing dishes when Jake came up behind her. "Emma," he said quietly, "I want you to know something. This marriage started as an arrangement to help us both. But somewhere along the way you became important to me, not just as a worker or a business partner, as a person I care about." Emma dried her hands on her apron and turned to look at Jake. His blue eyes were serious and kind. "I care about you too, Jake," she said, "more than I expected to when we made our agreement." Neither of them was ready to say the word love, but they both felt something growing between them that was deeper than partnership. Something that felt like the beginning of a real marriage built on respect and shared dreams. Winter came early that year, bringing with it the worst cold anyone could remember. Snow fell heavy and thick, covering the brown grass and making it impossible for the cattle to find food. Jake and Emma worked from dawn to dark, carrying hay to the animals and breaking ice on the water troughs so the cattle could drink. But their biggest problem was not the cold. The drought from summer had killed most of their crops, and they had very little money left to buy feed for the cattle. Each morning, Jake counted fewer animals in the pasture. Some had died from cold and hunger. Others had wandered away looking for food and never came back. Emma watched Jake's face grow more worried each day. He stopped talking about plans for spring planting. He spent long hours staring out the window at the snow-covered fields. At night, she could hear him walking around the house, unable to sleep. One terrible morning in February, Jake came in from checking the cattle with tears in his eyes. 3 more animals had died during the night. That left them with only 6 cattle out of the 40 he had started with. "We can't keep going like this," Jake said as he sat down heavily at the kitchen table. "I don't have money to buy more feed. The cattle that are left won't make it through another week without food." Emma poured him hot coffee and sat down beside him. She could see the defeat in his shoulders and the way his hands shook as he held the cup. "How much money do we need?" she asked. $50 would buy enough feed to last until spring, Jake said. "Might as well be 500. I don't have 50 cents to my name." Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood up and went upstairs to their bedroom. When she came back down, she was holding something small in her hand. "What's that?" Jake asked. Emma opened her palm to show him a silver locket on a thin chain. It was old but beautiful, with tiny flowers carved into the metal. Jake had seen her wear it only once on their wedding day. "This was my mother's," Emma said. "Her mother gave it to her and she gave it to me before she died. It's the only thing I have left from my family." Jake stared at the locket, understanding what Emma was suggesting. "Emma, no, I can't let you sell that. It's too important to you." "The ranch is important to both of us," Emma said firmly. "My mother would understand. She always said family takes care of family, and you're my family now, Jake." Jake felt something break open in his chest. For months he had been trying to keep his feelings locked away. He had told himself that their marriage was just an arrangement, that he could not let himself care too much for Emma because she might leave when her 2 years were up. But watching Emma offer to sacrifice her most precious possession for their ranch, Jake realized he had been lying to himself. Somewhere over the long months of working together and sharing meals and quiet evenings, Emma had become more than his wife in name only. She had become the person he cared about most in the world. "Emma," he said in a voice thick with emotion, "I can't let you do this. That locket is all you have left of your mother." "No, Jake," Emma said gently. "I have the memories. I have the things she taught me. The locket is just metal, and I would rather sell it than watch you lose everything you've worked for." Jake stood up and pulled Emma into his arms. He held her tight against his chest, feeling her warmth and breathing in the smell of her hair. For the first time since their wedding night, he let himself feel how much she meant to him. "I'm scared, Emma," he whispered. "I'm scared of losing the ranch. I'm scared of not being able to take care of you. I'm scared that you'll realize you made a mistake marrying me." Emma pulled back to look at his face. His blue eyes were full of fear and pain and something else that made her heart beat faster. "Jake Sullivan," she said firmly, "look at me. I didn't make a mistake. You saved me from a terrible situation, and you've treated me with nothing but kindness and respect. We make a good team. We can figure this out together." "But if we lose the ranch," Jake started to say, "then we'll start over somewhere else." Emma interrupted. "Together. But we're not going to lose it. We're going to take my locket to town tomorrow and sell it and buy feed for our cattle, And then we're going to work harder than we ever have to make this ranch successful." Jake looked down at this amazing woman who was willing to sacrifice everything for their shared dream. He thought about his first wife, Sarah, who had been gentle and sweet. Emma was different. She was strong and fierce and completely unafraid of hard work or difficult decisions. "There's something I need to tell you," Jake said. "About Sarah. About why it's been so hard for me to let myself care about you." Emma waited patiently for him to find the words. "Sarah got sick so fast," Jake said. "One day she was fine and 3 days later she was dead. I couldn't save her. I couldn't do anything to help her. After she died, I told myself I would never care about anyone that much again because losing them hurt too much." "But you do care about me," Emma said softly. "Yes," Jake admitted. "I care about you so much it scares me. You're brave and smart and kind, and I don't deserve someone like you." Emma reached up and touched Jake's face with her gentle hands. "Jake, you saved my life that day at the market. You married me to protect my reputation. You've worked beside me and treated me like a partner. You deserve all the happiness in the world." They stood holding each other in the cold kitchen while snow fell outside the windows. Both of them knew that something important had changed between them. They were no longer two strangers bound by an agreement. They were two people who had chosen to build a life together. "Emma," Jake said quietly, "when this crisis is over and the ranch is safe, I want to ask you something important. But first we need to get through this winter." "We will," Emma said with complete confidence. "We'll get through this and everything else that comes our way. Because we're not facing it alone anymore." The next morning, Jake and Emma rode to town together. Emma wore her mother's locket one last time as they walked into the jewelry shop. When they walked out, they had $60 in cash and enough hope to last them through the winter. But more important than the money was what they had discovered about their feelings for each other. They had stopped pretending their marriage was just an arrangement. They had finally admitted they were falling in love. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought new hope to Jake and Emma's ranch. The snow melted slowly, revealing brown grass that would soon turn green. The cattle that had survived the terrible winter grew stronger each day as they found fresh food growing in the pastures. Emma had been right about selling her mother's locket. The $60 had bought enough feed to keep their remaining cattle alive through the worst months. Now they had 8 healthy animals, including 3 pregnant cows that would give birth to calves in early summer. Jake and Emma worked together every day from sunrise to sunset. They repaired fences that had been damaged by winter storms. They planted the vegetable garden that Emma had planned during the long cold months. They built a new chicken coop and bought 6 hens and a rooster from a neighbor. But the biggest change was in how they treated each other. After the night when Emma offered to sell her locket, Jake stopped being so careful around her. He smiled more often and talked to her about his dreams for the ranch. Emma stopped being so formal and started teasing Jake when he did something clumsy. One warm evening in May, they were working together in the barn. A cow named Bessie was having trouble giving birth to her calf, and Jake and Emma were helping her. They worked for 2 hours in the dim light of the oil lantern. Finally, the calf was born healthy and strong. Emma and Jake sat back against the barn wall covered in straw and exhausted from their work. The new calf was trying to stand on shaky legs while its mother licked it clean. "Look at him," Emma said with wonder in her voice. "He's perfect." Jake corrected with a smile. "It's a little girl. We'll call her Hope, because she represents hope for our future." Emma turned to look at Jake. His face was dirty and his hair was messy with straw, but his blue eyes were bright with happiness. Without thinking, she reached over and brushed a piece of straw from his cheek. Jake caught her hand and held it against his face. For a moment, they looked into each other's eyes. Then Jake leaned forward and kissed Emma softly on the lips. It was their first real kiss as husband and wife. Emma felt her heart racing and her cheeks growing warm. When they separated, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "Emma," he whispered, "I love you. Not as a business partner or a helpful friend. I love you as my wife and the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with." "I love you too, Jake." Emma whispered back, "I think I started loving you the day you taught me to ride Star. Or maybe the day you showed me the sunset from the hill behind the house. Or maybe I loved you from the very beginning and just didn't know it." They kissed again, longer this time, with all the feelings they had been holding back for months. When they finally went back to the house, they walked hand in hand like a real married couple. That night, for the first time since their wedding, Jake and Emma shared the same bedroom. They talked quietly in the darkness about their hopes for the ranch and their dreams for the future. Emma told Jake she wanted children someday. Jake said he hoped their children would have Emma's green eyes and strong spirit. Over the summer months, Jake and Emma's love grew deeper every day. They worked as true partners, making decisions together and supporting each other through both good days and difficult ones. Emma's vegetable garden produced more food than they could eat, so they sold the extra at the weekly market. Jake's cattle herd grew to 15 animals, including 5 new calves. The people in town could see the change in both of them. Jake walked taller and smiled more often. Emma laughed easily and talked with confidence when they went to church or community gatherings. Nobody whispered about their strange marriage anymore. Everyone could see they were genuinely in love. One hot day in August, Emma was working in the garden when she suddenly felt very sick. She ran to the house and barely made it to the wash basin before she started throwing up. Jake found her sitting on the kitchen floor looking pale and shaky. "What's wrong?" he asked, kneeling beside her with worry in his voice. Emma looked up at Jake with wonder and fear in her green eyes. "I think I might be having a baby," she said quietly. Jake's face went through several emotions at once. Joy, surprise, worry, and love all mixed together. He pulled Emma into his arms and held her gently. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I'm 3 weeks late and I've been sick every morning this week," Emma said. "I think we're going to have a baby, Jake." Jake whooped with happiness and spun Emma around the kitchen. Then he set her down carefully like she was made of glass. "Are you happy about it?" Emma asked, suddenly worried. "We never really talked about having children so soon." "Happy?" Jake laughed. "Emma, I'm the happiest man in 3 counties, a baby. Our baby." For the next few weeks, Jake treated Emma like she might break at any moment. He wouldn't let her lift anything heavy or work in the hot sun. Emma had to convince him that pregnant women had been doing ranch work for hundreds of years and she wasn't going to hurt the baby by gathering eggs or hanging laundry. But their happiness was cut short one terrible morning in September. Emma woke up with severe pain in her stomach. By afternoon, she was bleeding and they both knew she was losing the baby. Dr. Martin came out from town and did what he could, but there was nothing anyone could do to save the pregnancy. Emma cried in Jake's arms while he whispered that everything would be all right, and they could try again when she was ready. The loss brought Jake and Emma even closer together. They grieved together and comforted each other through the sadness. Jake took care of Emma while she recovered physically. Emma helped Jake deal with his disappointment about losing their first child. "We'll have other children," Emma said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "When the time is right." "I know," Jake said, squeezing her hand. "And until then, we have each other and the ranch and a good life we've built together." As autumn arrived, Jake and Emma looked back on their first year of marriage with amazement. They had started as strangers brought together by desperate circumstances. Now they were truly husband and wife, bound together by love and shared dreams. The ranch was doing better than it had in years. They had money in the bank for the first time since before the drought. Their cattle were healthy and their garden had produced enough vegetables to last through winter with plenty left over to sell. But most important, they had each other. They had learned that love could grow between 2 people, even when it started as just an agreement to help each other survive. They had discovered that the strongest marriages were built on friendship and respect, and shared work toward common goals. "Do you ever regret marrying me that day at the market?" Jake asked Emma one night as they got ready for bed. Emma smiled and kissed her husband tenderly. "Never," she said. "That was the best decision I ever made, even if I didn't know it at the time." Jake held his wife close and thought about how much his life had changed since that desperate day when he spent his last money to save a young woman from a cruel fate. He had gained so much more than a helper for his ranch. He had gained a partner for life and a love that would last forever. 5 years had passed since the day Jake Sullivan spent his last $100 to buy Emma Rose Coleman's work contract at the Cedar Falls market. Now, in the spring of 1930, their ranch was the most successful in the county. Where once there had been 12 dying cattle, there were now 50 healthy animals grazing in green pastures. The old farmhouse had been expanded with a new kitchen and 2 additional bedrooms. Emma's vegetable garden covered 3 acres and supplied fresh food to half the families in town. Jake had built a new barn and bought modern equipment that made their work easier and more productive. But the most wonderful change was Emma herself. She was 24 years old now, and glowing with health and happiness. Her brown hair caught golden highlights from working in the sun. Her green eyes sparkled with confidence and love. And her belly was round with their second child, who would be born in late summer. Their first baby had been born 2 years after their marriage. Little Sarah Rose Sullivan had her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination. At 3 years old, she followed her parents around the ranch, chattering constantly and trying to help with every job. Emma stood at the kitchen window watching Jake teach Sarah how to feed the chickens. Sarah held the grain bucket with both hands and scattered feed everywhere, except where the chickens could reach it. Jake patiently showed her how to throw the grain in small handfuls while the chickens clucked and pecked around their feet. "Mama, look," Sarah called out when she saw Emma at the window. "I'm feeding the chickens all by myself." "You're doing a wonderful job, sweetheart," Emma called back. She smiled as Jake scooped Sarah up and carried her on his shoulders toward the house. The family was getting ready to go to town for the weekly market. Emma had baked bread and made preserves to sell. Jake had loaded vegetables from the garden into their wagon. Sarah was wearing her best blue dress with a matching ribbon in her hair. As they rode toward Cedar Falls, Emma looked around at the countryside with contentment. Other farms they passed looked prosperous too. The terrible drought and depression of the 1920s had finally ended. Families who had struggled for years were beginning to hope again. "Remember when we first came to town together?" Jake said, as if reading Emma's thoughts. "You were so scared and I didn't know what I was doing. I remember thinking you were either the kindest man I'd ever met or completely crazy." Emma laughed. "Maybe both. Papa was crazy," Sarah announced from her seat between them. "That's what Uncle Tom says." Jake and Emma looked at each other and smiled. Tom Miller had become one of their closest friends after initially doubting their unusual marriage. Now he often joked that Jake's craziness in marrying Emma had been the smartest thing he ever did. At the market, Emma set up their stall while Jake helped other ranchers unload their goods. Sarah played with the other children, running between the stalls and getting into harmless mischief. Emma sold all of her bread and preserves within the first hour. People came from all over the county to buy food from the Sullivan Ranch because everyone knew Emma's cooking was the best around. While Emma was counting their money, Jake heard Samuel Wright's familiar voice calling for attention. Samuel still ran the auction part of the market, though. He was getting old and his voice was not as strong as it used to be. Jake walked over to see what was being sold and stopped short when he saw a young man about 17 years old standing beside Samuel. The boy was thin and dirty with fear in his dark eyes. His clothes were torn and he kept looking around like he wanted to run away. "This here is Tommy Coleman," Samuel announced. "His family needs money for medical expenses. The boy's willing to work for 2 years to help pay the bills." Jake's heart stopped. Tommy Coleman, Emma's little brother who had been 12 years old when Emma was sold 5 years ago. The boy had grown tall, but Jake could see Emma's green eyes and stubborn chin in his face. Jake looked back toward Emma's stall and saw that she had heard Samuel's announcement too. Her face had gone white and she was staring at her younger brother with tears in her eyes. Sarah tugged on her mother's skirt, asking why she looked sad. Without hesitation, Jake walked forward and raised his hand. $200, he called out before Samuel could start the bidding. The crowd turned to look at Jake in surprise. $200 was more money than most people made in a year. "Going once," Samuel said, looking around for other bidders. "Going twice." "Sold to Jake Sullivan for $200. Jake walked over to Tommy Coleman, who was staring at him with confusion and fear. "Are you Tommy Coleman from the farm 20 miles south of here?" Jake asked quietly. "Yes, sir," Tommy answered. "Do I know you?" "I'm Jake Sullivan," Jake said. "I'm married to your sister, Emma." Tommy's face lit up with amazement and relief. "Emma, is she here?" "Is she all right?" "She's right over there." Jake pointed toward Emma's stall. "And she's going to be very happy to see you." Tommy ran toward Emma, calling her name. Emma dropped the money she was counting and caught her little brother in her arms. They both cried and laughed at the same time while Sarah watched with wide eyes. "I can't believe how tall you are," Emma said, holding Tommy at arm's length to look at him. "You were just a little boy when I left." "I missed you so much, Emma," Tommy said. "After you left, everything got worse. Papa started drinking more and we lost the farm. Mama Rose got sick and we don't have money for the doctor." "Mama Rose?" Emma asked. "Who is Mama Rose?" "Papa married again 2 years ago," Tommy explained. "Rose is nice, but she's real sick now. That's why Papa sent me here to work." Jake put his arm around Tommy's shoulders. "You're not going to work for strangers," he said. You're going to come home with us and help us run our ranch. As family, not as hired help." Tommy looked back and forth between Jake and Emma, hardly believing what he was hearing. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Papa owes a lot of money for Mama Rose's medicine." "I'm sure," Jake said. "Emma and I will figure out how to help your father pay his debts. But you're coming home with us where you belong." That evening, Tommy sat at their kitchen table eating Emma's pot roast and telling them about the last 5 years. Their father Pete had tried to keep farming, but without Emma's help, the household had fallen apart. He had married a widow named Rose who brought her own children to the family, but then she got tuberculosis and needed expensive treatment. "I wanted to find you, Emma," Tommy said. "But Papa said you probably didn't want to see us again after what he did." Emma reached across the table and took her brother's hand. "Tommy, I could never stop loving you. You're my family. I thought about you every single day." "What about Papa and Mama Rose and her children?" Tommy asked. "They need help too." Jake and Emma looked at each other. They had talked about this possibility many times over the years. "Tomorrow we'll drive out to see them," Emma said. "We'll bring food and medicine and see what else we can do to help." The next morning, Jake hitched up their best wagon and loaded it with supplies. Emma packed baskets of food, and Sarah brought her favorite doll to give to one of Mama Rose's children. Tommy rode beside Jake, pointing out landmarks as they traveled to the old Coleman farm. The farm looked even worse than Jake had expected. The house needed repairs, and the fields were overgrown with weeds. But when Pete Coleman saw Emma get down from the wagon, his face filled with joy and shame at the same time. "Emma girl," he said with tears in his voice, "I never thought I'd see you again. I'm so sorry for what I did." Emma hugged her father tightly. "It's all right, Papa. Everything worked out fine. Look at my family." Pete met Jake and Sarah and thanked Jake over and over for taking care of Emma. Then Emma met her stepmother Rose, who was thin and pale but had kind eyes. Rose's 3 children were shy at first, but soon warmed up to Emma and Sarah. Jake and Emma spent the whole day at the Coleman farm. Jake helped Pete repair the roof, while Emma and Rose planned how to get the family back on their feet. By evening, they had worked out an arrangement. Pete and his family would move to a small house on Jake and Emma's land. Pete would work as a ranch hand, and Rose could rest and get better. The children would go to school in Cedar Falls and help with light chores around the ranch. "Why would you do all this for us?" Pete asked Jake as they prepared to leave. "After what I did to Emma." "Because Emma loves you," Jake said simply. "And because everyone deserves a second chance to build a better life." As they drove home in the sunset, Tommy sat in the back of the wagon with Sarah on his lap, telling her stories about when Emma was little. Emma leaned against Jake's shoulder, feeling complete happiness for the first time in years. "Are you sure about all of this?" she asked Jake quietly. "Taking on responsibility for my whole family." Jake kissed the top of Emma's head and put his hand on her round belly where their second child was growing. "Emma," he said, "5 years ago you taught me that the best things in life come from helping people who need it. That day at the market you needed help and I needed help, and look what we built together. Now your family needs help and we have the ability to give it. That's what families do for each other." Emma smiled and closed her eyes, feeling grateful for the man who had saved her life and then taught her what real love looked like. Their story had started with desperation and an impossible choice, but it had grown into something beautiful. A marriage built on respect and partnership, a ranch that prospered through hard work and shared dreams.